to the concept of I'm not good enough as a whole. If you change I'm not good enough to I am good enough, now you are good enough in all situations. So you don't have to do that fixing on these levels. You're not fighting that, right? Which is what reduces that internal conflict because you're not trying to fight these conclusions. You don't feel I'm not good enough and then say, oh, I have to find a way to become good enough. No, you're just good enough. You can just move on.
Would you say that the only way is to do that unconsciously, or doing working on the subconscious? Because the way I understand, when you go to traditional talk therapy, that's the opposite. You're fully conscious what's happening. So when would you say it's better to do talk therapy instead of of uh, hypnosis, or vice versa? What would be the
Mm.
recommendations for people?
So in my own journey, I've done pretty much everything, right? I've
Okay.
done talk therapy, I've done coaching, I've done spiritual retreats, I've done entrepreneurial retreats, I've done psychedelics, I've done breath work, I've done hypnosis, I've done basically everything but acupuncture to fix my
Yes.
head, right? I've
Wow.
done it all. And what I realized along the way is like everything works. Everything works, right? But everything has limits, right? And so it's about understanding how that tool works and what you can use it for, right? Like there's this idea of like all models are wrong, some models are useful. You have to use the right map for the part of your journey you're on, right? If I want to walk down the street to the local Starbucks, I'm gonna use one kind of map. If I want to drive, 3 hours away to visit my parents, I use a different map. If I want to fly from Austin to Dubai, I use a completely different one. The Austin to Dubai map is not going to help me get to Starbucks. I can't do that, right?
Mhm.
So you have to use the right map for the job. And kind of like talk therapy is really good for when you just don't get it, when things just don't make sense, right? Because you're kind of trying to, it gives you a more rational, conscious understanding of why things are the way they are. Perfect. But it really can only give you an understanding. And all the tools you create from that are ways to make better decisions, right? It gives you a better decision making framework based on a better understanding of who you are and how the world works. Great. But you're not changing how that subconscious mind is moving through the world. You're not getting down there. You don't have any awareness of that, right? One of the reasons why I think psychedelics and psychedelic assisted therapy is becoming so popular is you're kind of blending those two worlds. Psychedelics are beautiful because they kind of open up that door to the unconscious mind and you get to have, a greater awareness of what's going on down there, right? It kind of like brings things up and kind of walks you through some stuff. So you get a lot more information from that perspective. But the problem is you don't have any control over where you go and what you see. Like it's going to take you on whatever journey it chooses to. You don't have a choice. And that can be kind of rough, right? Because a lot of times what it'll do is it'll show you what it thinks is most important for you to see. And if you haven't done a lot of work, that can be a really rough ride. Right? You can see some pretty cool stuff, right? Well, if you're carrying around a bunch of darkness, a bunch of baggage, a bunch of pain, it says this is what you need to deal with. You're going to see a lot of dark stuff that's really painful, right? And as much as that sucks, as much as that could be a horrible experience, like it's incredibly valuable because now you have a better idea of what the truth is down there from his perspective. But there's limits on what you can do change wise while you're down there, right? In terms of actually changing things and fixing things. And once you're done with that journey, the door to your mind, that part of your mind is closed again. Now you're doing again conscious work to understand and make better decisions with it, right? So there's just limits to what you can do with that. The reason I love hypnosis so much is I get to go ahead and do it as a directed, um, deliberate process. I get to open that door. I get to go down and find exactly what I want. I can spend as much time as I need to understand it. And then I can do all the work to change it while I'm down there. So we don't have to come back until we know it's fixed. Right. And that's the beauty of it. But that's not necessarily the first tool you need to use. And I don't think it's actually the best tool to use for different kinds of beliefs, right? Because we're creating understandings of the world both from the perspective of the forest and the perspective of the trees. Hypnosis for me is a beautiful way to play with this forest perspective because that's really the best way to get that direct access to it, to understand it directly and to change it directly, right? Because you're using like this camera and the computer system with it. You actually get to play with this thing and play with it directly. But this is not the best tool to play with this,
Mm.
right? This is a rational understanding of the world. This is logical understanding of the world. And that's better to play with and as a rational logical process, right? So it's using the right tool to play at the right part of your mind in the right way to create the change you need. The tricky part is figuring out where what's the phrase? Problems are very easy to solve once you know what the problem is, right? Once you know what the problem is, it's pretty easy to figure it out. The hard part is figuring out what the heck the problem is and where it is. And because we don't really understand how our mind is looking at the world from both the perspective of the forest and the trees, and therefore has two completely different sets of belief, we think we have one understanding of the world. Now there's two. And because we think there's one understanding of the world, we're using all the tools to try and fix this one understanding of the world when there are multiple understandings playing from different perspectives. So now we have to use different sets of tools to deal with different understandings because we've got different cameras, different lenses, different perspectives.
Wouldn't all problems be at the end of the day some childhood trauma? Is it possible to generalize to that degree?
I don't really like to talk about things in terms of trauma because that's not the way that everybody experiences or understands it, right?
Oh.
But I think the better way to look at it is as soon as we're born, we're trying to understand the world, trying to figure stuff out because we got to figure out how to survive and thrive, right? Got to figure it out. And so that part of your mind, your unconscious mind, is from the beginning just like trying to figure out what the heck is